My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of the history of God's true church, down through centuries of oppression, and onward until the promised earth is made new once more, collected in this book, War of the Invisibles, the amazing story of the great controversy. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words parental guidance recommended. Chapter 5, Part 1. Janessa, England and Bohemia, AD 1392 to 1416. Tower of London, Royal Court of England, AD 1392. My next recording assignment took me to the island of Britain, where I was following a teenage lady-in-waiting named Janessa. She served Queen Anne, young wife of England's King Richard II. "Uncle Jerome! Uncle Jerome!" Janessa squealed as she ran down the hall toward him. Uncle Jerome spread his arms and wrapped Janessa in a huge bear hug. Uncle Jerome was a Christian priest and unmarried, but he was like a father to his niece, Janessa. "How good to see you, Janessa. Life in England must agree with you. You're much taller than the last time I saw you." She laughed. "Oh, don't be silly, Uncle Jerome. You always say that." "Seriously," Uncle Jerome said, stepping back and looking at her closely. "How are you doing, Janessa?" Janessa looked down at her shoes. "I miss home," she said. "I love Queen Anne, and we have a lot of fun together, but she's homesick too. Do you think I'll ever get to come home?" Uncle Jerome shook his head. "I don't know, Janessa," he said. "For now, we have to be thankful for visits we are able to have with each other. We never know what God has planned for our lives." "Oh well," sighed Janessa. "Come with me, and let me introduce you to the Queen." Later, as they sat talking, Janessa looked over at her friend, the Queen. "It's safe," she whispered. "You can tell Uncle Jerome." The Queen raised an eyebrow, and then turned to Jerome. "There's a man in this country," she whispered, "who has been raising quite a flap among the church leaders." "Oh, really?" Uncle Jerome replied. "A heretic?" "Some think he is," the Queen replied slowly. "His name is Wycliffe. He is encouraging people to read the scriptures for themselves." "What a novel idea!" Jerome exclaimed. "Yes," the Queen replied, "but as people study the simple, compassionate life of Jesus, they'll see quite a contrast to the lives of many church leaders today." "I'm sure they will," Jerome remarked grimly. "Here, let me show you," Queen Anne said. She brought out a book by John Wycliffe and some sheets of paper with scriptures on them. Janessa, Uncle Jerome, and the Queen spent much of their free time together studying Wycliffe's writings. It seemed too soon when Uncle Jerome had to leave to go back to Bohemia. "I wish you could stay," Janessa cried. "I know," Uncle Jerome soothed, "but I work for Her Majesty's brother King Wenceslas, and I need to go back to his court." Queen Anne said, "I could write to him and ask if I could have you for my court instead." Jerome laughed. "Oh, ladies," he said, "I really do need to get home." "May I send some of Dr. Wycliffe's writings home with you?" Queen Anne asked. "Oh, why, certainly," Uncle Jerome replied. "I would be delighted to take them back with me. I would like to see these teachings studied more." "Oh, so would I," Queen Anne agreed. "I would do anything, just anything, to see this message spread back in my home country." Uncle Jerome paused. "Would you really do anything at all, even if it meant your death?" "Anything," said the Queen firmly. "Good for you, Your Majesty," Uncle Jerome declared. "Any time we are willing to do anything, the Lord is able to use us in whatever His plan is." Uncle Jerome left for Bohemia, known to some of you as the Czech Republic, with some of Wycliffe's writings. As he waved goodbye, he said, "I've had a good time with you. I love you and I'll miss you. I hope I get to see you both again soon. I can't wait to share these with my friend, John." Bohemia, A.D. 1394. The carriage rattled to a stop in front of Uncle Jerome's house. The door was flung open, and Janessa was scooped out and then placed in Uncle Jerome's strong arms. "Janessa," he said quietly as he looked down into her puffy, swollen eyes. Janessa wrapped her arms around Uncle Jerome's neck and burst into tears. "It was so awful, Uncle Jerome," she cried. "What am I going to do now?" "You are going to come inside and get warm, and then you can tell me all about it," he replied. "You can live here with me until you get married." "I'm never getting married," she sobbed determinedly. "Well, I'm not either," he reminded her. "You can live here with me until I turn into an old coot, and you'll still be young enough to take care of me," he joked. "Oh, Uncle Jerome, could I, please?" she begged. "Of course," he replied. "Now come in and get warm." She paused. "Oh, my luggage." "Here are your trunks, ma'am," the burly coachman said, gesturing to 4 large pieces of luggage sitting behind the coach. "You certainly came home with a lot more than you took with you," Uncle Jerome observed. "The Queen must have been very good to you." "Yes," Janessa sniffed. "She was." Uncle Jerome tried to pick up one trunk and stopped. "What on earth do you have in these?" he asked. "Bars of lead? Large English rocks? Some of that heavy English cooking?" Janessa giggled in spite of her tears. "I didn't bring back a stitch of clothing or any of that fancy stuff," she said. Soon they were inside Uncle Jerome's house, and Janessa unlocked the trunks. They were filled with books. "What are these?" Uncle Jerome asked. "These are all of Her Majesty's books," replied Janessa. "She wanted you to have them. She wants Dr. Wycliffe's teachings to be shared with the people here in her country." "So she knew she was dying?" Uncle Jerome asked. "Yes. She got sick so fast, but she had time and the clearness of mind to think of you. The other ladies think she was poisoned." "Shh!" Uncle Jerome said as he dropped his voice to a whisper. "It is never safe to share those suspicions out loud, even when you are almost certain you are alone. Even the walls have ears these days." Janessa dropped her voice and whispered to Uncle Jerome. "She and the king did not agree on religion. He was a very unkind man. The Queen was only a little older than I am. It was just awful." Uncle Jerome wrapped his arms around his little niece. "I am so glad you are back here where it is safe," he whispered. He closed his eyes, offering thanks to God. I shuddered. Did her uncle really think it was safer in Bohemia? Was there any place on this sinful little planet that could be considered safe? I shook my head. Fortunately, neither of the tearful humans could see me. "Janessa," Uncle Jerome said as he finished supper, "this has been a terrible experience for you, but it could have been an answer to prayers." "Whose?" Janessa asked sarcastically. "King Richard's?" "No," Uncle Jerome replied slowly. "Anne's." "How?" his niece demanded between bites. "Remember when I visited you in England?" Janessa nodded, chewing slowly. "Remember when Anne said she would be willing to do anything, even if it cost her a life, to share these teachings with her people in Bohemia." "Oh," Janessa said. She did say that. Now all her books are here in her home country. Do you think this is the way God answered her? I could feel much better about all this if I thought that Anne was willing to give her life to help her people learn more about God. That is much easier to live with than just remembering how miserably she was treated and how I think she might have died. It was such an ugly way to die." I smiled at the guardians. They were smiling too. If these poor humans could just see what we see, they would never choose any plan other than the one the Almighty has given them. If only they could know that no matter what happened, He is still King of the universe, and His plans would still go forward. Of course, they had been told this in the scriptures, but humans are quite forgetful. Still, the Mighty One's spirit often whooshes in and shares His plans with them, deep inside their thoughts. I knew that if Janessa could remember this experience, she would be a strong warrior in the continuing battle. After seeing life with Queen Anne and her husband, she may never want to marry, but she need not be married to do the job the Almighty has in mind. Megan, Tower of London, A.D. 1401. I returned to the island the natives called England to record the choices of Megan, a little girl who lived in London. Megan was still a child, only 10 years old by human count, and from a very poor family. She had been given a job in the Tower of London as a scullery maid. Though she was paid very little, she was fed in the tower kitchens and was able to take a little money home to her family. I followed her as she struggled up the coal-stone stairs, lugging a huge bucket of coal. The burly jailer stomped along ahead of her, his keys jangling with each step. Reaching a large door, he unlocked it and said, "Knock when you're done and ready to come out." Timidly, she stepped into the room, and he locked the door behind her. She seemed to be unaware of the guardians with her, and looked very frightened. The rooms were not well lit, and it took her a few moments for her eyes to adjust. "I'm not going to bite you," said a deep voice in the corner. She jumped. The man laughed. "Come over here, where I can see you." Megan walked timidly toward the light spilling in from a grate high in the wall. The man was in the darkest corner of the room, and she could see nothing but shadows. "Poor child, you're shaking. Are you frightened?" Megan didn't answer. "Ah, you're wondering what kind of criminal I am, and whether I'm going to hurt you." Megan nodded shyly, staring at the floor. "Well, you can relax. I haven't killed anyone, nor do I intend to any time in the future. I don't hurt women, and I certainly never pick on children." "But then why are you here?" Megan blurted before she could stop herself. "If you're not a violent criminal, then you must have plotted against the king." The man's laugh boomed through the stone room again. Whoever he was, he had a sense of humor and an infectious laugh. "Ha ha ha! I never plotted against my king," he said seriously. "The king and I are friends." He stepped out from the shadows and into the light. "Oh, my Lord Cobham," Megan whispered, sinking to her knees. "Oh, get up," Lord Cobham said. "I don't think you need to kneel to me in here." "What happened to you?" Megan asked. "Why are you in here? Surely the king will have you out of here in no time. It must be a mistake." "It is no mistake," replied Lord Cobham grimly. "Have you heard of Dr. Wycliffe?" Just that he is a terrible heretic, and that his followers are those Lollards who have a funny accent and aren't too smart. We were laughing at some of them in the square just the other day. My brothers were following them through the town, swaying back and forth, imitating their funny hymns, but adding naughty words to them. I haven't had so much fun in I don't know how long. But I don't know anything about the doctor. Why do you ask?" "Well, I am in here for being one of those not-too-smart people." "Oh, my lord, forgive me," Megan cried, falling on her knees again. "Please don't have me beaten. I didn't know.
Get up. Get up." Lord Cobham barked irritably. "Nobody's going to beat you. Considering that I'm a prisoner here, I doubt if anyone cares what you say to me. Besides, I believe it is customary to be rude to prisoners in the tower," he added with a twinkle. "Do you ever read the scriptures?" he asked, changing the subject.
I go to Mass every Sunday. Well, most Sundays. And the priest reads us for Mass," she replied.
Lord Cobham persisted. "But have you ever read them?"
I go to Mass, and I cross myself, and I do whatever the priest tells me to do," she persisted defensively. "Of course, I don't read it myself. It's in Latin."
"What if you could get part of the scriptures in English?" Lord Cobham asked patiently.
Megan twisted her apron. It wouldn't do me much good," she answered softly. "I can't read English neither."
"Of course. Forgive me," Lord Cobham apologized. "You've probably never been given a chance to learn to read."
"No, my lord, but I'm pretty bright, and I learn as fast as a boy. If it ever was to happen, I'd be reading everything in sight in no time, I would."
"I'll make you a deal," the man offered. "Life in the tower is pretty lonely, at least in the prison part."
They both laughed, knowing that on the other side the Tower royal apartments were where King Henry and his court stayed, and partied.
"If you will come and spend some time with me each day after you finish your tasks, I will teach you to read. I promise to be absolutely respectable, and if you are unhappy or afraid at any time, you can just knock on the door, and the jailer will let you leave."
While this would have been a foolish deal to make with most criminals in the Tower, Megan was falling right into a plan the Most High had for her life. I already knew what the brave Lord Cobham would use for reading materials to teach Megan. For a recording job in a prison, this was going to be fun. "Tell me more about Dr. Wycliffe," Megan requested as she entered Lord Cobham's cell with his lunch. "Is he a doctor who helps sick people?"
Lord Cobham shook his head. "No, he was called Dr. Wycliffe because he was a professor at the University of Oxford. He was a very serious Bible student."
"Ah," she replied, "so he was just a doctor for people who were sick of sin."
Lord Cobham laughed. "You have that right," he said. "As he translated the scriptures and shared them with his students and others, he found things that were different than the church leaders were teaching. He felt that many church leaders were lazy, taking money from poor people but not helping the people whom they accepted money from. Dr. Wycliffe believed they should use the money to help the sick and the poor, and those who had nothing, as Jesus did. If Jesus were their example, then they should be helping people and not just getting rich off the poor people."
"Well, that makes sense," commented Megan.
"There was more," Lord Cobham continued. "As he studied and translated, Dr. Wycliffe found that the scriptures teach that God's plan of salvation is enough for us to be saved. We don't have to have a lot of extra rules, and we don't have to go through priests and popes to beg God to save us. He already loved us and made a plan to save us. What Jesus did for us was enough."
This sounded very strange and new to Megan. I watched her chew her lip thoughtfully before answering. I guess that makes sense too. If he is the king of the universe, then he's strong enough and powerful enough to save us all by himself. He wouldn't need us to go through other weak humans who make mistakes." I smiled. This girl had a tender heart combined with an open mind and a willingness to learn. Lord Cobham nodded.
"And Dr. Wycliffe taught that forcing people to keep lots of extra rules wouldn't help them be any more saved or any more acceptable to God."
"No wonder the church leaders hated him," Megan said. "It sounds as if they were mad at him just because if everyone believed the way Dr. Wycliffe taught, they wouldn't be as powerful."
"You're right," Lord Cobham replied.
Did they kill him?" she asked.
Lord Cobham laughed. "No, they hated him all right, but he was a friend of King Edward."
"Edward the Third?"
"Yes," answered the young lord. "You know your kings. Dr. Wycliffe became chaplain to the king."
"You mean like the king's personal pastor?" she asked.
"Yes, he and King Edward were very good friends."
"Kind of like you and King Henry?"
Lord Cobham nodded. "Yes, kind of like King Henry and me. For a while they convinced King Edward to send Dr. Wycliffe as an ambassador to the Netherlands, but after 2 years he was back. They wanted very badly to get rid of him, and even tried to take him to court for heresy. But the judges were too afraid to convict him, so they let him go."
"You are a friend of the king too," Megan began, "but you were locked up here in the tower."
"Yes," Lord Cobham answered.
"Why?" she asked. "Why doesn't King Henry protect you?"
"Shh! It is very important never to say anything that could sound disloyal to our God or our king."
"Even if he lets you be put in jail?"
Megan asked. "Right," Lord Cobham answered. "Even if he lets you be put in jail. We don't always understand what God has in mind when he allows things to happen, but we need to never be disloyal to him. King Henry is my friend, and I'm not disloyal to him either."
"I don't understand," Megan murmured.
"Well," Lord Cobham replied, "you know we've had 2 kings who did not reign very long, and there's been a lot of unrest in our country."
"Yes," she answered. "Kings Richard II and Henry. Neither one of them had long reigns like Edward's."
"Right," said Lord Cobham. "King Henry is the king, but he understands how shaky his position is. He needs to maintain the support of the church leaders because they are so powerful."
"And so, because you're a follower of Dr. Wycliffe, they hate you and want you put in jail?"
"Yes. The king has protected me many times before, but right now he's needing to protect himself."
But,
Megan protested. Lord Cobham smiled. "Each one of us faces a time in our life when our loyalty to God is tested. Mine is now, and I choose to be loyal to God in what I believe he wants me to do. Right now, King Henry is choosing to protect himself, and I understand that. You too, Megan, will have to choose which side you'll be on. At some point, you'll be brought to a crossroads where you will have to choose whether you will follow God or other people's ideas."
I nodded in agreement, even though neither of them could see me. All humans must make this choice at some time in their lives. Megan looked at her feet. It all sounded so difficult. She wasn't sure that she could follow God if they were going to put her in a cell in the tower, as they had done to Lord Cobham.
"Megan, don't look so afraid," he said. "When the time comes, the Lord gives you all the courage you need. He gives us everything we need when we need it. Don't be afraid. Just learn what you can about him now."
She smiled.
Lord Cobham said, "I'm going to eat my lunch now that it's nice and cold."
Megan giggled. "I'm sorry," she said, "but thank you for telling me more about Dr. Wycliffe." I watched with interest as the friendship between Megan and Lord Cobham deepened and developed. Megan was a bright girl and learned to read quickly. Lord Cobham shared small portions of scripture with her that she took home and shared with her very large family. Soon, several friends were gathering in her home in the evenings to hear the scripture portions that she brought home. The Almighty's plan was going well. One day, Megan was very troubled.
"What's the matter, child?" Lord Cobham asked as she entered his cell. "You are so quiet today."
Megan burst into tears.
"Oh, come now," he said. "It can't be that bad."
"It is," she snuffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "I heard some gossip down in the courtyard today. They say you might be executed."
Lord Cobham was quiet.
"Is it true?" she demanded. "Have you heard?"
"No," he said. "I haven't been told anything. But that is always a possibility. Not too long ago, Parliament put through a bill that made it legal to burn people who teach things different than the church leaders teach. So it is possible, because I do."
Megan sobbed. "But that would be terrible."
"Well, it certainly wouldn't be my first choice," Lord Cobham answered. "But that does sometimes happen, and I knew that was a possibility when I made these choices."
Megan stopped crying and stared at him. "But you're a friend of the king. Would he let that happen?"
"I don't know," Lord Cobham said thoughtfully. Then he asked, "If I write a letter, will you take it to a friend of mine?"
"I'll do anything to help you," Megan answered. "You know I will."
"I'll work on it tomorrow," Lord Cobham replied, "and when you bring me my lunch, I'll place it under the bowl on the tray when you take it away."
Megan nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes to get you out of here." It made me sad to see Megan so worried. I knew that though King Henry was sympathetic toward Lord Cobham and felt guilty about his imprisonment, he would not read the letter. He was too weak to stand up to the powerful leaders who opposed Wycliffe's teachings. "Have you heard anything back from the king?" Megan asked a few days later.
"Nothing," replied Lord Cobham. "He may not feel he's able to help me right now."
"What is going to happen?" Megan asked, twisting her apron nervously.
"We must not panic," Lord Cobham said. "We must pray about it, and if the Lord gives us a way of escape, we must take it. But if he doesn't, Then we must face whatever the plan is bravely and trust him." Megan's eyes widened as she watched him. I could see it all sinking into her mind. Then she asked, "How did Dr. Wycliffe die?" "Ah, that's a lovely story," Lord Cobham answered. "He got very ill one time. The church leaders who had been his enemies were delighted. All of them gathered around his bedside and told him he was dying. Gasping for breath, Dr. Wycliffe told them, 'I shall not die, but live and declare the glory of the Lord.' They all went away, shaking their heads in disgust," Lord Cobham continued. "Sure enough, Dr. Wycliffe got better, and went on translating the New Testament and teaching people about God's love for them. 3 more times they tried to take him to court and accuse him of heresy, and 3 more times the judges refused to find him guilty, and he was set free." "So he died an old man?" Megan asked. "Yes," Lord Cobham replied. 54 is pretty old, don't you think?" "Oh, yes," Megan said. 54 is very old. Most people don't live nearly that long here." Lord Cobham smiled. "Although all of us would like to," he said. Megan laughed. "Dr. Wycliffe was in his church worshipping God and was just about to start the communion service when he died suddenly." "Oh, terrible!" exclaimed Megan. "No," Lord Cobham said, "it wasn't. Right before we participate in communion, we pray and ask our Lord to clear our hearts of anything wrong. It was the perfect time to die. His heart was right with Jesus, and there was nothing to separate them." "Oh," Megan said slowly. "Then I guess that was a good time after all." "Yes, it was," Lord Cobham replied. "And if I should be executed here in the tower, it will be just like that, because I will already know when I am going to die. I have already confessed all my sins, and there's nothing to separate me from the love of Jesus either. And if that should happen, it is going to be okay. I am not afraid. Whenever it happens, it will be a good time." I hope that these thoughts lodged firmly in Megan's mind. She would need to remember them later. Epilogue. Later that year, after cautioning Megan to be careful of false doctrines and always to search the scriptures and find out the truth, Lord Cobham escaped from the tower. Megan missed him terribly, but she was glad he had escaped. It was part of the plan of the Almighty for him to share these things with her and with others in Europe. In December of the human year AD 1417, he returned from France and hid himself with a friend, Lord Powys, in his castle in Wales. But Lord Powys was not the friend Lord Cobham thought him to be. He turned Lord Cobham over to his enemies in England. Lord Cobham was hanged, then burned on the scaffold. How carefully the Mighty One had prepared Megan for this time. The things that Lord Cobham taught her came back to her mind. She continued to work in the tower and faced the sad day with great bravery. During this time, many followers of Dr. Wycliffe died for their faith, but as more died, even more sprang up, such as Megan and her family. Nothing humans did could stop the Mighty One's plans. I smiled as I continued to record.
This broadcast has come from the book War of the Invisibles by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.